We welcome you for today's last session. It is artists on the global stage. There was a time when if anybody said culture, it meant only dance and music, but people are now realizing that culture means a lot. But our cultural ambassadors that really take things out of our country are our musicians, our dancers, and our performing artists. So we will hand over the chair now to Rukmini Vijayakumar. Aparna will introduce her before that. And thank you all very much. And once again, we thank the panelists of the previous session, and namaskar.
Thank you, Akka. India has led the world in the field of aesthetics, from seminal works on aesthetics and performance. India has informed the pedagogy of the arts around the world. Indian artists have taken center stage in the world, imbuing global art with a flavor of Indian bhakti rasa. And it is very difficult to think of an artist who embodies this much better than Srimati Rukmini Vijayakumar, who will be the chair for this session. Rukmini Vijayakumar is an Indian choreographer and Bharatanatyam dancer from Bangalore in India. Along with her performances on stage, she has appeared in 4 South Indian Tamil films. She is the artistic director of Raadhakalpa Dance Company and the director of Lashva, a space for artists. We are thankful to Rukmini for chairing this session and also for her spectacular video which she made for the Center for Soft Power for International Yoga Day, which has just 2 days ago crossed 1 million views. Thank you so much, Rukmini. Over to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'd first like to welcome my panelists for this evening, Shri Purbayan Chatterjee, Sooraj, Subramaniam, and Arushi Mudgal, who are here with me. And I'm going to have a short introduction about them, and then I will continue on to so that all of you can understand a bit about their work through my questions that I'll pose to all of them. So welcome everyone. I'm really looking forward to talking to you all. So I'll start with Purbayanji. Purbayanji is one of the most sought after sitar maestros who currently play the sitar in India. And he was a student of Pandit Prataparatim Chatterjee, his father, and Ustad Ali Akbar Khan. And he's also studied under Pandit Ajay Chakrabarti, Pandit Arindo Chatterjee, and also I think Shankar Mahadevan, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. And his music is inspired by the sound of Pandit Nikhil Banerjee. And he's conceptualized many projects and played with many artists and bands, and he's collaborated with a numerous number of artists, which we'll all learn through the course of this evening. I'm going to next tell you a little bit about Sooraj. Sooraj Subramaniam is a dancer, originally from Malaysia, but then he's been all over the world, and he's right now in Belgium, right? Okay, it's hard to keep up with Sooraj because every 2 years, whenever I see him, he's moved countries. So he's right now in Belgium. And what's special about Sooraj is that he started with training in Bharatanatyam and Odissi, but he also went on to learn ballet and contemporary in Australia at the Academy of Performing Arts. He's worked with a numerous number of choreographers across different styles of dance. And while he's very strong in the classical forms, he's also a wonderful contemporary dancer. And so he's worked with a lot of the choreographers, both in the UK and across Europe. And he's presented in festivals. If I need to name all of them, I will take the entire hour. So, so he's performed at the Dublin Dance Festival in Dusseldorf, and he's worked with Balbir Singh Dance Company, Kalpana, Raghuraman, Shobhana Jai Singh, amongst many others, and also recently with Sita Patel. He's also been working on some of his own original work as well. And I will tell you a little bit more about this in our conversations. Welcome, Sooraj. Arushi, who has also become a dear friend of mine over the course of these panel discussions that we've both been attending in the past months. Arushi is one of the most foremost young talents in Odissi, and she has learned under Guru Madhavi Mudgal at the Gandharva Mahavidyalaya, and an institution actually founded by her own grandfather. And her own father is a very versatile musician, Madhuk Mudgal. So she comes from a family of artists, growing and learning with them. She's been, rightfully complimented and reviewed by numerous critics as, and they explain how beautiful her dancing is. And I can vouch for that because I've seen it. And she moves like water. This is not something I'm quoting. I'm saying it's myself from what I see of her moving. And she was one of the critics, chief dance critic of the New York Times, also wrote that how amazed he was at how fully she seemed one of India's most remarkable dancers. And she was selected as one of the top 10 dancers of 2018 by the New York Times. And there are a lot of dancers in New York, and Arushi was one of the top 10 in 2018. And while she performs Odissi, I've seen her perform with her aunt on several occasions, and she performs extensively as a soloist. She's also collaborated with a number of artists over the years, also beginning to choreograph and present her own work while in different situations. Now, after this extremely shortened introduction of these wonderful artists, I'm going to start with just telling you all a little bit about how similar they all are. And I think that one of the things that all the artists of this evening have is a very strong grounding in the classical Indian or an Indian form, whether it's classical or not. So it just happens to be classical in this scenario. And all three of the artists present work both in this classical forum within the traditional within the constraints of what we perceive as a traditional idea of presentation. And they all also collaborate and perform in collaborative work, which may not be as traditional or presented in the traditional format of performance. And all the artists of our evening have danced and presented both traditional and collaborative, maybe contemporary or explorative work to both Indian and Western audiences. So there is something that holds them to this idea of this Indian art, and still they continue to work and explore other ideas without limiting themselves to this idea of what people perceive as the ends of tradition. So I'm going to ask a question to all of you, and you can all answer it one after the other. What is special about the Indian art form that you practice, and why is it special to you? Purbayan ji, can we start with you?
First of all, I'm kind of lonely in the company of dancers. I wish there was some other musician or vocalist to represent the more auditory art forms, because dance obviously is a visual art form. Secondly, just to correct a couple of things in the introduction. So my father and my guru's name is Pandit Partho Pratim Chatterjee. And I did study under Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab in the True Guru Shishya Parampara. And Shankar Mahadevan ji, yes, he's a mentor, and I have had the privilege and pleasure of working with him a lot, as well as, you know, in the course of collaborating with him or working with him. Of course, I have learned a lot from him since I've been living in Mumbai. So anyway, just to set the record straight. To answer your question, I think the instrument I play, which is the sitar, has become an icon for Indian classical music for sure, and even for Indian classical culture. I think you will see there are umpteen examples of the sitar as an icon. I mean, literally as an icon. You click an image of the sitar and it takes you into the world of Indian culture or whatever. Thanks to the efforts of people like Pandit Ravi Shankar ji or Pandit Nikhil Banerjee or Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab or Ustad Alipur Khan Sahab, it's become like that. I think one of the things that I love about our music is its ability to sort of transcend the barriers of culture. It is obviously spread far and wide, and I think people have found a common idiom. And our music allows for that. It is so highly improvisational, and yet that improvisation is within the parameters of a kind of structured grammar, which lends itself well to collaboration. And one of the things I think which is really special about the sitar specifically, but generally about Indian classical music, is this ability to sort of adapt and adopt and lend itself to collaborations pretty seamlessly. So that, in my opinion, is a really special thing. I think all music speaks a very universal global language, but we are trained, especially in the tradition that we are trained in. We are trained to listen. It's all based on listening. And the listening ability is so well developed that we are not necessarily dependent on written stuff. And this is what enables us to very quickly listen to a piece of music and pick up certain nuances about it, even though the structure or the idiom of it might be different. So that, in my opinion, is the most special thing about it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that even in dance, with what we find as well as music, is that we don't have this idea of a repertoire that exists, that is replicated generation after generation. Even pieces that are considered or perceived traditional, they change with every student, even within the same class, and everybody performs it differently. And Arushi, can you talk a little bit about the newer projects where you specifically have said that with a lot of improvisation? And there's several of those which you have done more recently, either Haveli, and I think, which you said, I think something with the one that you made at Serendipity Arts recently as a collaborative project with your father. And you said there was a lot of improvisation. Can you elaborate a little bit about how that takes a special place in Indian arts and for you?
Thanks, Rukmini, for having me firstly. I think, of course, like Purbayan ji just said, that Indian classical music, of course, has a huge aspect of improvisation. The raga itself, the concept of raga itself lends itself beautifully to the idea of improvisation. And each time a musician renders the same raga, same bandish, the same composition even, it's going to be different each time. And how I think even in our dance forms, especially in the Abhinay aspect, there is a lot of improvisation, because we're in that moment. The idea is basically to get to lose yourself in that character or the story or the idea that you're playing, and to sort of, when you're in that moment, what may lead you? Maybe sometimes the music leads you, sometimes a thought in your mind leads you, sometimes you just feel differently even about the same piece. So there are moments where that concept of improvisation does occur. Of course, in dance, there is more structure than Indian music. There's no doubt about that. And especially in dance forms like Odissi, Bharatanatyam and all. If we talk about Kathak, it's different slightly in that sense. But still, yes, there is that idea of improvisation very much there that exists.
But how does this make it special for you as a performer? Like this idea of improvisation.
See, Rukmini, I do work on my pieces, choreographies. In fact, I work on them a lot before I present them. But like I said, in that moment on the stage, there are so many other factors that come into being. So there are a lot of other factors that come into being when you're on stage. There are the lights, the music. Sometimes the musician changes the, the line or something. So you're always sort of in that moment, alert and being attentive and, just following whatever energies you're getting. Even from the audience, you get such different energies. But for me, creativity plays a very, very, very significant part in my, the way I present my dance. Even when I'm creating my pieces, when I'm choreographing, I do like to sort of think, if I have a posture, I'd like to think how differently I can arrive at that posture instead of just following the traditional ways of doing it. And I think the tradition itself also allows us to do that. In fact, encourages us to do that. Our Indian tradition, the beauty lies in the fact that they are meant to be taken forward in our own ways. Each dancer, each musician has to take it forward in their own way. What we understand of it, what aesthetics we connect with, and how we can take it forward. So I think that is the beauty. There is so much scope for creation, for crossing the line, and yet the line remains there. You know what I mean? Yeah. And for me, that is the beauty and the challenge and the struggle, but not really a struggle. Something that I enjoy engaging in is to strive to strike that balance between the frame, the boundary, and the sense of abandon. So that is the beauty for me. That's what I like to play with.
Yeah, of course. With classical forms, there is a sense of abandon that when you very the tradition also. Right. Sooraj, I wanted to ask you on the same lines. With your training, your background, and as well as like just the places that you've been, you haven't very much lived in India, and you've had plenty of opportunity as well as physical capacity and ability, and I've seen you move to go completely contemporary, but you've continued to return not just to Bharatanatyam and Odissi, but you've also studied Kathak again after that for a few years. And all the choreographers you've worked with, starting from, I would say, after your initial performance with Casimir's Colors at the Hong Kong Festival, after that, all your work is in some way engaged with Indian artists or some kind of Indian content, from Nina Rajarani to Balbir Singh, and then Shobhana Jai Singh, Kalpana, Raghuraman. All of these works have something, even Sita Patel, have something, either Bharatanatyam or Odissi, and I've seen them use your strength in those vocabularies to bring out their ideas. And what is it that brought you back to this?
Thank you for having me on the panel. I think it's probably just quite a practical consideration, foremost being that despite being not Indian in the literal sense, I wasn't born there and I didn't grow up in India, there is an Indianness in me through my dance forms, which I cannot separate from who I am. And so having been predisposed to these art forms, the ideology, the ethos from a young age, it is the strongest aspect of my artistic expression, even though I've learned other forms of performing. And so because it is the strongest and the most visible aspect of my performing arts, it is the easiest tool, the easiest skill to extract out of me for choreographers to work with. So it's purely a practical thing, I think. For me personally, I think when I think of the Indian arts, I echo entirely what Purbayan and Arushi have said about the generosity of the Indian art forms. What I particularly like, and having conversations with friends, sometimes I just think it's easy to get lost in the romanticism of the Indian arts. What I like about the Indian art forms is that they're, particularly if we talk about dance, they all talk about the human condition, about the personal condition, and it's just easiest to relate to as an individual, as opposed to, you're not compelled to say, you're not making an advertisement for nationalism, or you're not making an advertisement for social justice, or a lot of the topics stem from issues about the personal human condition. And so that's why I'm drawn to it over and over and over again, because just to reiterate what the others were saying, it allows for the generosity of expression, and it allows you to just make it your own. And I think the choreographers that I've worked for, you know, whomever I've had the serendipitous occasion to work with, also work from those areas, even though their works might be more abstract, less traditional. Again, it comes back to having the space to do things from a personal interpretation. And I absolutely love that. And so, you know, whether the choreographers have sought me or whether I've sought to work with them, this has always been the key ingredient, that we always find a personal way to look at things, because, and the art form allows for it. It's a really wonderful space to be in.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful answer. And I think it brings out, in terms of, in many ways, the essence of Indian classical art, because it is every person's journey, actually, in terms of finding yourself, or that is repeated across the content that is there through every traditional song, or everything it just goes back to the same thing. At the same time, from a more technical perspective, this is a question that any one of you can answer. I've always thought that with Indian art in general, I can only speak about performing art because I don't have an extensive knowledge of anything else. With Indian performing art, I sometimes feel the most unifying factor is this diversity that exists. Like if there's one Tyagaraja Kriti, it is rendered in a million different ways. And it is the same Tyagaraja Kriti, but it can be sung, danced, and performed by a million different artists who make it their own. And how do you feel that this exemplifies differences and at the same time unifies us? This is how, your thoughts on this in general.
Can I just say, being a non-Indian in the literal sense, and growing up with a guru who was also non-Indian, learning an Indian classical dance, it's taken me, of course, a lot of time we're still grappling with the idea of what classicism means. I'm particularly attracted to structure and the formality in the dance styles, which I do. And I think the appeal of the styles that we do is that they're able to transcend these things. I think because the appeal is to the individual. You're able to transcend the layers of identity that you might carry on with you. You might be a part of an ethnic community or a religious community or a national community. You're able to transcend all those things. And if the art is speaking to you individually, then you're able to connect with lots and lots of different people on an individual level. As Purbayan was saying, I think this is a universal appeal of the classical dance and music, but it's not addressing any particular sect, any particular group of people, despite the traditions having come from a very Hindu base. The art forms themselves are geared to speak to the individual. And so that's allowed, say, a non-Indian, non-Hindu teacher to go to India and seek the art forms and teach us. I'm second generation Malaysian because my grandparents left India. And it feels like, I've gone full circle to come back to relate to something that's a part of my heritage in a very distant way. But I relate to it on a very personal level because despite its cultural significance, I think it touches me more in an artful way. What is its artistic significance? I think that touches more people than merely talking about its cultural value. And there's I don't know, there are no words for it. How do you describe Ananda, for example? You have to experience it. There are no words to say how it touches you. There's something about it. There's something about its non-scored. It's not a written form like other art forms. It's something about that just allows it to appeal to the individual. And that being its strength, it's just, it makes it for both a very diversifying as well as a unifying thing.
Thank you, Sooraj. I have another question. Purbayanji, I would like if you could answer this first, especially when we work with, in a collaborative sphere with other artists from other countries and other genres of art. There is something that we carry as artists who have a particular style and form, especially in India when we come from this parampara of learning where we have a particular guru and a particular style and a tradition. We are attached to this art in more than one way. We're attached to it emotionally, technically, physically, and in many ways spiritually as well, because it becomes a part of our being. Now, when we have this, there's definitely an identity that we create, an identity that we associate with as artists within this sphere of whether it's Odissi or Bharatanatyam or playing the sitar or singing or whatever it is. We associate ourselves with this. When we collaborate with artists that come from a different cultural identity, do you feel that it is necessary to keep our Indian identity, or do you feel that it really doesn't matter at all?
See, it's very interesting because tradition is a little bit like religion. It is, it should be a binding as well as liberating factor. Okay. Yeah. And when we are kids, or in the metaphoric sense, when we are young and our value system is still developing, then it should be a binding factor. Beyond a certain point, it should be a liberating factor. Now, I was listening to Soorajji was saying just now, and you know, as much as even what you were saying just now, our parampara and the guru we have learned from, or the style that we represent, in as much as that forms your identity, and that's a great thing because that's the flavor that you bring to the table. But we also risk becoming a little anachronistic. You know, in the name of tradition, art should imitate life. And if you look at contemporary jazz, if you look at you know, many of the other genres of music, even if you look at you know, hip hop or reggae, if you look at the blues, you will see that everything embodies a certain time in history. If you look at you know, even if you look at Western classical music, classical merely means a certain period. There was the Baroque period. There's the classical period, there's the Renaissance period. And you know, our music is of course timeless, and it's remained the same tradition. And whereas we value and treasure that, but at the same time, now to answer your question more specifically, I think it is the job of the artist to find that fine line. And as Arushi also very wonderfully worded it, the line exists and yet it doesn't exist. So you must know how and when to cross it so that you do not become an anachronism. Very often I've seen Indian musicians go and try to impose their ragas on the Western musician, to talk to them and say, oh, this is raga Charukesi, and this composition, that even when it's their composition, they'll say, oh, these are the notes of Charukesi. But you know, you have to understand that you cannot always expect him or her to speak your language. You have to learn to speak their language as well. And that's how collaboration works. So having said that, now comes the question of your identity or what you bring to the table. So that also you must not forget. Right. You have to remember, I always try to remember that they're calling me because I play the sitar. So if I'm being brought into an ensemble and there are, you know, 50 different, you know, harmonic changes happening, and there are, you know, there's a bass player playing or a drummer playing, or as many as, you know, there may be sounds or, you know, context or whatever. But what do I bring? I bring the sound of the sitar. I bring Indian inflections to it. It's a little bit like going to a Pan-Asian restaurant. When you go to a Pan-Asian restaurant, they serve you Chinese, they serve you Indonesian, they serve you Malaysian, and it's all brought together, you know, in one platter. And they'll say this is a Pan-Asian platter, for instance. But, you know, you are going there when you order a khao sui, for instance, then you want a little flavor of Burma. When you order, you know, a pad thai, you want a little, you know, something which is from Thailand. And that is what we must not forget. So it's balancing these two things, not becoming an anachronism. We actually seriously are at risk of becoming anachronistic in the name of this, great tradition. So we must know when to hold it close to our heart and when to let it embrace us from all around and let other things into our system.
Right. That's a wonderful answer. And I think that more and more, a lot of artists are trying to balance and find it. Arushi, with your new, I'm not going to say new, but because it must have been years ago, you created this project Sama with a percussionist who was French, and you taught it and you performed it with him. I saw a few of those videos. And you perform a lot within the traditional vocabulary, within traditional settings. And in this context, do you feel that, because I've always thought that the more you know a form, the easier it is for you to work with someone else from another vocabulary. Because I very often find, because then you know it so well that it's your friend, and you can, you know the right questions to ask and the right things to bend and push. So how is it for you when you made this work? And I saw you dancing. So she dances on this drum and she creates percussion with her feet on this large drum. So though she's dancing, she's also making music. And then the percussionist plays on this drum behind her. And it's something that's visually beautiful. And at the same time, you're still dancing Odissi, which is beautiful. So how is that to work with that, and how is it for you? And how is it different than the other work that you make?
So it was very different in the sense that I was totally out of my comfort zone, so to say. So this whole comfort of familiarity was totally taken away from me, because on stage I was there only with Roland, who was this percussionist, and there was no musician, no other, there was no melody, so to say, on stage. There were those instruments that were specially created for the production, large, sort of the way you mentioned, large drums and, squares and all those kind of structures, but with some sort of music emanating from them when you hit them, whether he hit them with, hit is not a great word, but, when he used his hands on them, or when I was stamping on them with my feet, with the way you stamp it also created a different sound. So that was all that was available, and we had to create with those structures around us. So it was very challenging for me. And you said that it does become easier the more command we have over our dance form or art form. Yes, that's true. But having said that, it also becomes more difficult in a sense to let go of that, because it's so much a part of you that you don't even realize that while walking, you're walking in that stance, and everything, it's just in you. So to take it out of you is for me, it was really hard, because it was the first time I was doing something like that. So to separate myself from it was very hard for me. It was very challenging, and yeah, it made me, and that's what I say, it made me a lot braver, to create something like that. And the structure that you mentioned when I was dancing on it, it sort of balances on a central point. So you just have to be right in the center, and if you sort of step a little more on the right or the left, it starts moving like that. So to stand on that and stamp and create, sounds out of it was very, very difficult. And we worked a lot on all those things. So but the entire journey, the process was extremely beautiful, and it was a huge learning for me. And I always believe that a collaboration is not supposed to be that I bring in my, my style or my form is there, and the other person's form is there, and they're just two forms put together. That's not a real collaboration. You're just doing it together on the same space. The idea is both of you to come together and create something that creates a third dimension. That has to come forth. These two have to merge to create a different flavor. So that I think has to be there in a collaboration, and it shouldn't be just for the sake of saying that, oh, I collaborated with so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. So for me, that way, this was a very interesting project to do. And similarly, several other projects.
That's lovely. Thanks for that, Arushi. This is another question that I wanted to ask all of you. Before I have another question for Sooraj specifically about his performance, is that when we do make these changes and we use the art that we have, that comes from a very kind of traditional idea of how it is to be presented, because I know that exists in India across the styles of music as well as dance, because there is a prescribed format. There are certain ideas of presentation that exist. Now, when we, Purbayan very beautifully said that it flows and things change and there's a period and art moves, and it flows many times like a river, changing as we go along, right? And that's something that we can't prevent. But many times as classical dancers and musicians, we're very much, sometimes this preservation of tradition becomes, in some ways, is placed at a step a little bit higher than the art itself, or tradition, or the idea of tradition stays higher. So in this context of collaboration, and I know all of us learning in this format, we have this struggle in our heads, and we think this is traditional and I'm doing this, and how does that, you know, it could also be the struggle that we grapple with when we're put into a situation outside. How is it that we work with this? One, is it important that we adhere to this idea of tradition? Does it serve something in purpose? Does it not? If it does, what does it serve? If it doesn't, and it's not important, why is it that it's not important? And how is a learning in a new situation beautiful for us as artists? And what do we get from that? I know it's an elaborate kind of large, long question, but
is that one question?
It's one question. So why, if we have tradition and you say that we must keep it, why must we keep it? If we should change it, why must we change it? And if you say that I really like doing this and I like doing the traditional format, why? What is the newness offered to you, and what does this offer to you?
So if I may
yes, please
pick up on your cue. Yes. So I think first of all, we must define what is tradition.
Yes.
What is tradition today? What is tradition 50 years ago? And what is going to be the tradition? I mean, the word tradition, let's say post-COVID times, okay, like what is the tradition? Okay. And we talk about the new normal, right? So tradition is also flowing. Tradition is also kaleidoscopic in nature. It's always changing. So we have to define, first we need to know what it is that we are preserving, you know, because, you know, are we because, you know, you have to understand that our cultural conditioning is only about, I don't know, 50 years old, 100 years old. You know, your cultural conditioning cannot go beyond that because it's like Chinese whispers. As it gets passed down, it slightly changes, you know, ever so slightly. Fortunately, we belong to a country and a tradition where, I mean, it's also an oral tradition, the whole Guru Shishya Parampara. So that there's a bigger chance of Chinese whispers. But fortunately, we are pretty rigid that way in the way we believe things. Our belief system does not change, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. But so first we must define what is tradition. Secondly, we must decode tradition. Now, here's the biggest problem is we are sometimes stuck. You know, we believe things which have been told to us without entirely decoding them. Once you decode as a musician who has collaborated with several musicians, not only, you know, the collaboration starts by first playing a jugalbandi with, you know, a sitar. Instead of a sitar jugalbandi, you do a sitar vocal jugalbandi, so that's where it starts. The sitar itself as an instrument is a combination of the veena and the more Persian elements of our music. You know, the sarod has come from the rabab. So if you look at a history, I know Sooraj was saying that it's a predominantly Hindu tradition. Yes, Drupad, But then, you know, there's such a big, you know, Persian influence on, especially on the North Indian, the Hindustani classical music system. So what we perceive as tradition is just an amalgamation of the various things which has happened. You know, it is very much a case of art imitates life, only we don't like to admit it. We like to say, oh, this is a 1,000-year-old tradition. Oh, yes, it is. But then it has also evolved with time. So if you decode tradition, and if you know, are able to sort of evolve in your own art form, I think at a certain point you will understand that tradition itself is fluid, and that a lot of things are very, very simple and easily malleable. Like, you know, music is just music. Dance is just dance. You're basically moving to a beat. It may be sacrilegious to say it, but you're basically moving to a beat. If I'm playing music, I'm responding to a bunch of musical phrases, which may be laid down in a certain harmony or not. There is an underlying harmony in Indian classical music as well. So if you can come to that point, and I liked what you said very much, that it has to become your friend. Tradition has to become your friend. Tradition has to be your wings. If it sits on your shoulder, it has to be your wings, not like some baggage on your shoulders, which is tying you down. So I feel that decoding of tradition is very important. That is the job of the guru. The guru must always not thrust upon your shoulder the baggage of tradition, but rather give it to you as wings, which you can use and fly.
That's such a beautiful thing. Not baggage, but when it's on your shoulder, it sits as wings. It's such a beautiful image, you know. And I think that's a wonderful thing to say. I think I'm going to use it. My imagery.
I just made that up. That's not a quote from someone else.
So, Sooraj, this is something that I wanted to ask you. You have been performing extensively, as you know, with the nuance of both Bharatanatyam and Odissi vocabulary within a contemporary structure. Now, as audiences, as people, as human beings, we all have different aesthetic preferences, you know, which is why we're in different colors, in different outfits. We have different houses. And it would be almost ludicrous to say that everyone enjoys the same thing and everyone must like Bharatanatyam, or everyone must like an Alaripu as much as I do. It would be silly to imagine that. So now, understanding that aesthetics definitely change, though we are in a digital world where consumption is changed and we listen to jazz and we listen to all these other things that were inaccessible before, there still exists a collective aesthetic in audiences of different countries. Now, when you use this, when you perform Bharatanatyam or Odissi in its classical, we perceive currently as the traditional form, and you perform it in the contemporary format, how is it different for audiences, and what do you feel changes both for you as a performer as well as for an audience who is not necessarily in terms of consuming this art?
Gosh, that's also a very broad question.
Yeah.
I think after having done quite a lot of soul searching about this, I've come back to what I've heard many times by senior artists who take their word for it because they've had more experience. You I just have to go back to the integrity of your art form as it pertains to you. Yeah. There is no way, even though tastes may vary, as you're saying, aesthetic preferences may vary, you simply have to go to your artistic integrity and just be rooted in it completely. And for want of a better word, not pander to those tastes, because I see a lot of the time those tastes as being trends or fads.
Right. Yeah.
Changing from where you are in relation to where you are. And the difficult thing is, as an individual, it's next to impossible to try and please everybody. The only person in that moment that you can please is yourself. Yeah. And the only way to do that is to be completely rooted in the integrity of your form. And that might mean, for example, not being completely rigid about how you practice it, but I think Arushi used the word malleable, or somebody used it, Purbayan used the word malleable. It's a finding the porousness of your art forms, like you're saying, you're finding the boundaries, but realizing that they're not hard walls, that they're fences with lots of room. It's like the ribs that allow you to breathe. There's so much room. So within that, giving yourself enough space to vary things, that you can entertain yourself as you go along, so that as you are having a play, you draw people into what you're doing. I'll give you a very simple example. I presented a short, very short solo piece in New York a few years ago. It was not a traditional piece by any means. I called it contemporary for want of a better word, because it was not in the traditional format. I was not in kacham, I was not in any kind of traditional attire. But the piece was entirely about me, about a personal experience, about not being able to sleep. But my vocabulary, like Arushi was saying, is very difficult to take away what's in my body. What I've imbibed from all the classical training is a formality of movement, is a creation of lines through tension. Nothing is floppy. So this is the classicism that I'm carrying with me, the tool which I'm using then to tell my own story. So somebody said to me afterwards, they said, oh, what will the purists think about this? So then I thought, okay, here we are talking about different aesthetic senses. Like, what are purists going to think as opposed to audiences who know nothing about it? And some hyperventilating aside, I had to say, you know, I have no answers to anybody. I'm not here to represent somebody else. I'm only representing myself. This is my story that's coming from a culmination of my experiences and my training. So I'm only here to talk about my story. And this is the only way I know how to tell my story. It so happens to be that my body carries the erect spine of Bharatanatyam and Odissi, and, you know, the balanced pelvis and the free footwork underneath. That happens to be my body, and I'm using it to tell my own stories. So long answer short would be to remain true to the integrity of who you are as an artist, and yeah, not worry too much about what the tastes are, because I think if you find your axis, then you'll find there will be a gravitational pull that will draw audiences in, rather than trying to find what's drawing you outwards. And that way you're just spreading yourself too thinly, and then the art becomes a bit meaningless.
Yes,
I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. It answers it perfectly. And I especially like the thing that you said about that's how I know how to tell the story, which is what is the most important thing. Because I always feel that many times we struggle with saying people like this, so that person likes that, and I must do this so that people can assimilate this, or people can assimilate that. But then if you just use what you know, and for us, it is whatever we have learned. And that's the only way you know how to say it. And because it comes from a place of needing to share, it automatically becomes honest. And so if it means you're collaborating with someone, you're making some changes, you're doing something else, it's perfectly all right, because you're being honest to you. And if you are in it, it will draw people into it, whoever will come within our access. I love your answer. It's a beautiful answer. I'm just going to have an open question to everybody as the last one, and then take a couple questions from the audience. When we look at that being said, as Indian artists, many times, like when we perform, like say in a temple festival, or we perform in in a sabha kind of setting, or we perform somewhere abroad or in a corporate event, I know that we change what we present, right? We change slightly. We think about what we present, and within the scope of what is still honest to us, we choose within that and we present it. So I want to know if there is something that you feel people assimilate easier with Indian art, like larger audiences, assimilate this aspect about your personal art. They assimilate this easier. And this aspect, a smaller number of people assimilate, but it means a lot to me, so I still dance it. So is there something like that that you feel that you segregate for yourself, or you don't, you just perform the same work everywhere? How is it for each of you? Anybody can answer that. I'm just talking in terms of audience experience and what you perceive. Yeah.
No, I said it's your turn to speak, Arushi.
Yeah.
Because we've given long answers. So
yeah.
No, that's no, I was just saying, Rukmini, that often when we perform for audiences abroad, sometimes we worry about Abhinay pieces because we feel like they're based on mythological tales or, you know, characters of the mostly Hindu tradition. And are they going to understand, or what's the response going to be like? But in my experience, what I have realized is that people perceive the content that we present differently. That is for sure. The way I present an Abhinay, the way it will be perceived in a Sabha or a Kachari in Chennai will be very different from the way it will be perceived abroad, for sure. But having said that, we cannot underestimate the audience and say that, you know, oh, they're not going to follow this, so let's not do it for them. Because I have realized over the years that abroad audience perceives Abhinay beautifully. I mean, sometimes they are in tears and they come to us after the performance, and it's such a moving experience to see that energy exchange with people who have actually absolutely no idea about who Krishna or Radha is. And that's where, you know, it really reaffirms your belief in the idea of the universal, you know, the universal nature of the stories that we present. And this is something that I say repeatedly, that it's not Radha Krishna. If I'm trying to express their love, it's actually just that emotion of love. It's how I feel love. For me, that's how I see it. For me, the way I experience love is the way I depict it. I don't know how Radha experienced it, but if I were in that position, in that situation, this is how I would feel it. And once I'm convinced about it, is how it gets expressed to the audience. And I think that sense of conviction of being honest to yourself, what Sooraj also just said, is so important. We cannot be trying to follow what's the trend or what, because it's then not going to be yours. It has to be your own first, and only then it can get communicated. And once you sort of, you know, you're in there and you absorb it, and when that's, I think, the idea of rasa also, right? You know, only once you experience it yourself is when the audience is going to be able to experience it, and they'll be able to go with you on that journey. And that does happen, you know, for different audiences as well. So I think we need to take that slight risk and present the pieces that we're afraid of, because more often than not, they work.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. I mean, thank you all so much. There are a lot of quotes I'm going to take away from this. I'm just going to, there are a few questions from the audience that I'm just going to direct at all of you. It says that many international artists say that they are learning classical Indian dance or music not to become Carnatic or Hindustani musicians or classical Indian dancers, but to give a new dimension to the art they already do. Does Indian art allow for this surface level engagement? Does it do justice to our art forms? You would like to answer, Arushi? Yeah, please.
Or can I just go? I think that's fine, you know, if we, I mean, we also always go and experience and explore other art forms, even if it's salsa, hip hop, or, you know, classical music or jazz or anything. So the idea is to experience different art forms and draw inspiration from them. And I think that's a good idea if people are learning our dance forms, and especially when they have that intent so clearly in their minds that they don't want to become practitioners and they just want to learn it to absorb as much as they can and, you know, take from it what they can. I think that's a beautiful thought, and there shouldn't be any problem with that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. This is another question. Oh no, they said no, that's not. Wait, I'll look at the other. Who defines classicism? Dancers are criticized for not being classical enough. So who defines this idea of classical?
I think this is just It's a constant negotiation, no, because it's still a relatively new term for the arts in India in general. I mean, I think we're in constant negotiation about what this term means. Who defines it? I don't know. I suppose we collectively just have to get into the ring and punch it out and see, you know, whoever the strongest is comes out. But I think for me, there's something in it about, I don't know how Sangeet Natak Academy defines classicism or classical for that matter. For me, it's like a formality. It's got something to do with, there's a rootedness in the spine, particularly when it comes to, I'm just going to talk about the dance, obviously, because that's what I know. There's a rootedness in the spine. The pelvis, and I see this across all the styles, there's a real rootedness in the pelvis. It's not something that it deflects, but there's so much control in it. Even if you take one of the really gentle forms like Manipuri, for example, where there's constant flow in the things, there's real intention behind the movement. Nothing happens haphazardly. So I use that term, the intention to, and I say there's a tension. I don't mean there's strain, but there's a tension in the way that the movement's created. And there's this pelvis, there's this kind of plateau beneath which the torso is free to move independently from the legs beneath. These are the ideas which I associate with being classical. So when I see a dancer who has got these various elements kind of drawn together, and the focus of the art is internal rather than external, that to me looks classical. And so those are the elements. When I see those elements in a different, if I see them in a painting, I'm taking these ideas. If I see these ideas of internalizing, if there's a rootedness, if there is a base upon which you can be fluid and flexible, then to me that speaks, you know, it speaks volumes more. There's something about it that draws you inward. And that to me is classicism. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful definition. Purbayanji, yeah?
So first of all, I just have a couple of minutes after which I have to excuse myself. But to answer your question, I think that was a dancer's question predominantly. But yeah. if you're talking about what is classical, I think when I said that tradition is redefined constantly, I think that, you know, even what is classical and what isn't is also being redefined constantly. But having said that, I think in a very particularly Indian music context, we have certain texts which which lay down our content, which is classical. I mean, especially because we have Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra. So we do have a definition of content which is considered classical. And it has been documented and archived in that way, and is continuing to be documented, and archived even better. Having said that, again, it is very generous, as Sooraj Bhai said. It actually encompasses more and more, repertoire material with every passing day.
Oh, thank you.
Having said that, I have to excuse myself. I'm already 5 minutes late. So if I may excuse myself, thank you for having me on this platform. And it was truly wonderful interacting with all of you. And thank you to the audience for being patient and listening to our somewhat difficult discussion.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank
Namaste.
you.
Namaste.
So just to conclude, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for joining and bearing with all my questions. Just to sum it up, I'm going to say from what I understood this evening is that there is a collective consensus that all of us who practice the classical arts, the Indian classical arts specifically over here, find that it does change and move. And though we love it and we learn it in this traditional format of this Guru Shishya Parampara, and we delve into it almost, I know for a fact, every day, all day, it allows itself to move and change and sits upon our shoulders like wings and lets us fly free, as long as we're being honest and true to ourselves. And thank you all so much for joining me this evening. And thank you to the Center for Soft Power for having us.
Namaskar and thank you all. I know you're all very busy artists just raring to leave from here. Thank you very much. And I do know that you're all performing all over the world. And since this is the Center for Soft Power, we look on you as our ambassadors. And we would want that you all hold, you know, our country and culture and should I say classicism together forever and ever. And we would like to end with a piece of music that the Berklee School of Music has shared with us. So just bear with us for 3 minutes and we will call it a day and we will bid you all goodbye then. And namaskar. So thank you all very much and Shubharatri and well, it's good morning to people who are viewing this from other parts of the world. We look forward to such interactions and Sooraj, thank you very much. Arushi, thank you very much. And Rukmini, thank you very much. And well, Purbayan ji just left. So thank you all and we look forward to such interactions again. Thank you very much. Namaskar. And we'd love to see you all again on Friday night. We have a dance discussion this Friday night called Center Stage at 6 p.m. We have the ambassador of Spain and the ambassador of India to Spain and the ambassador of, we have the ICCR equivalent of Spain in India. The two of them will be there and we have Parshvanath Upadhyay and Ranjit and Vijana performing. And we will also have a discussion on artists navigating this pandemic. So if any of you are free and would like to join us, we'll be really happy. It's on Friday night. And of course, the audience, we'd love for you to be there. And the entire schedule is there for Saturday and Sunday too. Thank you very much. Namaskar and Shubharatri.